am very grateful to Priya who connected us, and thanks to her efforts that we are all together in this amazing technological platform. I'm actually kind of very humbled to see the numbers today, and it's increasing every second. And there are two ways to look at it, that at 3:30 either I will be very humiliated or I hope I would have done some bit to make your life a little bit better in your careers. And I have a very interesting journey before I became an academic. I actually chose to study computer engineering not because I wanted to become a computer engineer, but there was this amazing movie called Jurassic Park, the first one. And in that movie, there's a scene where the children are running and the velociraptors are following them. And these children go to this control room, and this girl looks at a computer and starts to work on it and clicks some buttons and shuts the doors and then announces that this is Unix system. And I was fascinated by that scene, and I thought that this is what I will learn in a computer engineering degree, and I was so wrong. And that's how I make my decisions. All my decisions are very strange, and I'd like to share with all my listeners on this bridge that the way I even selected my engineering college has a very interesting story to that. So this is somewhere in 1991, 92, when I was in a small town in west of India. It's called Jodhpur, and I come from a family of doctors. And everybody in my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, my brother's wife, my mom's three brothers, and their family members, everybody's a doctor. And doctors are very interesting people. They treat you like a disease, so they just label you with a name, and at the end of the day you are a disease with a name. So I was a disease with the name of Rakesh, and they try and fix it. So I made my first career decision way back in 1991 that I will not become a doctor. So that takes care of a very big part of my career management. Now, when you have decided that I will not become a doctor and you're from a small town of Jodhpur in Rajasthan, there is only one choice left. But I decided that I will not take a choice. So I walk up to my mom and say, Mom, I will become a chef. And there was such a big disappointment in my house that my mom stopped cooking for 2 days. And all of you who are on the bridge, if you've seen this movie called Three Idiots, which was shot in IIM Bangalore, and I watched all the shooting, there is this Raju Rastogi's house. And whenever they would go to his house, they would portray that house in a black and white with Kammo in one corner and depression looming everywhere. So when I told my mom and dad that I'll become a chef, that was the kind of situation in my home. And I could not see my parents in sadness. So I said, okay, what do you want me to do? I can't see you sad. You're my parents and I love you. So they said that, beta, we want you to become an engineer. So like a true negotiator, na tera, na mera, I decided that, all right, I will become an engineer, but on one condition, that I will find a college outside home and I will go there and study. So my mother was very sad, but she reluctantly agreed. And she said that, okay, na tera, na mera. So now, way back in 1992, when you have to make decisions on what colleges to choose, internet was not there. So you relied on information from friends and whatever came to you through brochures. So I was very confused which colleges to choose, and there were a handful of colleges in India at that time. So one day, my brother's friend, who was studying in this amazing college called REC Trichy, he comes to our home and he said that, Rakesh, I study in this awesome college called REC Trichy, and you must come there. And we party all day, we have fun. And I said, that's the place I want to go. And Trichy sounded really cool to me. If you look at the way the word sounds, there's London, there is New York, and there is Trichy. So I said, Trichy is my place, and I will go there. So computer engineering, Trichy was my eye of the bird, and like Arjun, I was only focused on that eye of the bird. So I would wake up in the morning and tell myself I have to go to RAC Trichy computers, and I would sleep in the night and I would tell myself that I will go to REC Trichy. So I got a very good rank in my state. For the first time in my life, I studied and I got a good rank. And the day of counseling came, and I was way ahead in the queue for counseling because I had a good rank, and I had filled only one choice in my engineering form, which is REC Trichy Computers. Now, when I was standing there on that queue and my chance was about to come in few minutes, I realized that 3 or 4 places ahead of me, some other bloke had figured out REC Trichy and computers, and he had already selected it. So in a fraction of a second, my entire dream collapsed and I started crying. So my brother, who saw me crying, he understood my plight and he ran around like a madman. And he spoke to few of his friends, and he came back. And when he came back, I was just few seconds before I was about to enter the counseling room and demand my seat. So he comes and tells me that, Rakesh, I have 2 more colleges for you. The first college is called Motilal Nehru College of Engineering. It's in Allahabad. It's a very old college and very famous. So I said, yeah, I know that. What's the second college? So my brother said that, see, I don't know the name of this college, but I heard that it's on a beach. And I said, I'm going there. That word beach just clung on to my ears. And I said, I'm going to go and study on a beach. So I walk inside my counseling room. There are 3 professors who are the counseling professors. They ask me, son, where do you want to go? I said, sir, I don't know the name of the college, but I heard it's on a beach. So which college is that? And these professors were so shocked at me asking this question that they started laughing. And they said that, son, we are very curious. When did you get to know about this college? So I very shyly responded, I said, sir, few seconds before. So they really were very disappointed, and they looked at me and said that, son, are you serious? You're going to a place you don't even know? I said, yes, sir, but I'm very convinced that I will go to this college on a beach and I'll study computers there. And they said that, son, that college is called REC Surathkal, which is now NIT Karnataka. So I was very excited when I heard that name, and then I asked that professor that, sir, is computers available? And they said yes. So that's how I filled my form and got a seat in REC Surathkal, and I did computer engineering there. And when a child from a very conservative doctor family of Jodhpur goes to a college called Surathkal on a beach, he does everything what a young boy should do, which is have fun, never study. So I never studied, and I was one of the worst computer engineers in my batch. And my rank in my class was about 38th out of 44. But somehow I survived and I got a job in Wipro, which is a story again as well, which I'll tell you some other time. But I want to pause right now and ask all of you this question, that when I told you this story, weren't you transported to your own childhood and college days? Didn't you feel good? And didn't you understand my message? And the answer is probably yes to all of these things. And the next question that we should ask is that, why is it that you were transported? Why is it that many of you would have felt good? And why is it that many of you understood the message? And the answer is that what I did in the last 7 or 8 minutes was to narrate a story of my life which had some purpose. And in this particular scenario, the purpose is to convey a point. And this is the power of storytelling, which is very evident in science and how the brains process a story. So I'll give you 2 scenarios. Now position your mind to your day-to-day lives and your corporate presentations. People make presentations, they are very logical, there's a lot of data, there are graphs and lots of stuff. But basically, that kind of information is processed by the topmost part of the brain that you see in this slide, which is the neocortex. That's where all analysis happens. We understand math, science, we understand logic, we understand computers, mechanical, whatever industry you are in and whatever job you're in, you understand all that. But that part of the brain is also the furthest away inside the brain, which means that when the information enters the brain from the spinal cord below, it will travel all the way to the top and process. So a lot of brain power is actually wasted. Only a few parts of the brain actually absorb this information. Scenario two is when you tell stories. The moment a story enters the brain, it starts getting processed in the areas of our brain which are called the reptilian brain, because some parts of stories have emotions which are basic emotions of life. And then above that brain, there is the limbic brain, where more complex emotions like memories come in. So when I was telling a story of my counseling and my engineering decisions and doctor and all that, you probably would have gotten your own memories of childhood, your own dilemmas of career, and you would have started processing that. So my story was not only processed, it was absorbed in almost every part of your brain till it reached the topmost part of neocortex and you were able to enjoy it. So the key message I'd like to give all of you today is that stories are the most gentle and the most effective form of persuasion. Now, this requires us to digest this particular slide a little bit. That what is persuasion after all? Persuasion is what we do every day in the office. We have to influence and convince people to do a certain thing which is good for the organization and the stakeholders. So we have to give them logic and data and facts. That part we understand, but that is also a very harsh form of persuasion because we are essentially making the audience work very hard. But in a story, the audience actually processes information and actually does not work that harder, because all the parts of their brain kind of balance the information and process it. So to give you a scenario, if you take two people and put them in two separate rooms, room one, they are listening to a normal business presentation. You now hook their minds to some nodes and some devices and measure their brain signals. So that is room number one. Room number two, you have a different person. Again, you connect a lot of devices to his brain and measure his brain signals, but make him listen to a TED talk which has a lot of stories. And when you look at their brain signals that will come on the monitor in front of you, you will find that the person sitting in the second room, his brain is much more fired up. It is much more active. And I think that's the missing science of presentations. Human beings, all of us, you and me, are very busy people. We have our brains full of lots of things to do. We have bills to pay. We have EMIs to take care of. We have problems at home. We have problems at office. And now this person is making a business presentation which has got lots of numbers and graphs, and it is very hard to digest. And then our cell phone has WhatsApp interrupts and Facebook and so on and so forth. Now, in this busy mind, I have to put my message. And if the message does not have stories, this person's mind will process it with a lot of effort, and probably he will give it, he will probably not do the processing, he'll let it go. But if there's a story, this person will be much more likely to process that information and will be able to get your work done. And I chose this photo of Shrek on this slide again for a reason. Shrek is actually a beautiful story. If you look at the whole concept of Shrek, they took the most hideous creature, an ogre, and made it into the most loving movie you can ever think of. That a person with a terrible body and a green color who lives in a swamp which is stinky and dirty can actually experience love and can also propose to a girl, have children, and live a wonderful life. And that is the whole thing that movies and directors and authors do, that we look at life and we tell stories. And why do we love these movies? It's because when we come out of that theater, we feel good about ourselves. We feel good about life. Now, the question is, how do we bring it into our corporate world, which is, pardon my language, not very exciting and sometimes can get very dry and boring? The answer is all of us can try and bring stories and make things much more gentler and much more fun for all of us. So, what is a story? I think a story is a simple form, a narrative of an event which can be either true or fictional, But the essential element of a story is that it has a lot of emotional content and sensory details. And this is where we will spend some more time to understand how do we bring more emotional content and sensory details in our day-to-day presentations. I'd like all of you to read this story. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to read this, and I'll narrate it very slowly. The motivation behind the name given to Ubuntu operating system. An anthropologist proposed one game to the African tribal children. He placed a basket of sweets and candies near a tree and made them stand few meters away and announced that whoever reaches first would get all the sweets in the basket. When he said, "Ready, steady, go," do you know what these small children did? They all held each other's hands and ran towards the tree together, distributed the sweets amongst them, and ate the sweets and enjoyed it. When the anthropologist asked them why did you do so, they said Ubuntu, which meant how can one be happy when all others are sad? Ubuntu in their language means I am because we are, a message for all the generations. Let us all carry this attitude within us and spread happiness wherever we go. Let's have a Ubuntu life. I am because we are. Now, when I was narrating this story, your mind would have conjured up a scenario. You would have seen a village, you would have seen a tree, you would have seen the children, you would have even seen the color of their skins and their hairstyles, because the mind does stereotyping. And when I was narrating it, you actually predicted what's going to happen next. And very gently, this message came in your brains: I am because we are. And after reading such kind of stories, we do feel nice because that's the simplest emotion we can all digest. So this is how a story shapes up. There are some elements of a story that impact audiences. And when we start putting these elements, the results are for everyone to enjoy. So how does one make anything into a story? There are four elements. The first is add a place. In the Ubuntu story, there was an African village. Second is add a time. You could say things like last December at 9 a.m. in the morning on a wonderful but cold winter morning. So that place or that time makes it much more interesting. The third very important part of a story is a protagonist, a hero, or someone who can be called a person of interest in that story. In the Ubuntu story, it was the anthropologist and the children. And we have to make this person have a name, some features, describe it in a way that audience can understand. But the whole idea of storytelling is to have characters. You can have multiple characters. You need not have only one. But the whole idea is to apply basics of storytelling that we know from childhood. And finally, there is the details and the narrative, which means this is where your creative imagination goes in. If you have a protagonist called Shrek, you must be able to define Shrek in some form and shape, with the color of the skin, with his ears, with his dress, in the kind of a forest and a swamp, and you could define it. And each of these details, when put together, is the narrative. So this is as simple as it can be. Add a place, add a time, add a protagonist, and add details, and your storytelling is begun. Now let's see if we can use this simple technique in our day-to-day talk. So here are two scenarios. Imagine somebody giving a presentation. That's the talk one. That's the normal presentation talk. Let's read it. It was late Friday afternoon when we got the service call from our biggest customer. Their system was down and they were losing money by the minute. So this is a very standard talk. It's very easy for us to get these words out. But if we add the storytelling concepts, which we discussed in the last slide, which is place, time, protagonist, and details, we can look at talk two, which is as follows. Last summer, our engineers were almost burned out. They had just released a new product after months of hard work and overtime. Our lead engineer, Robert, had told the guys that they could leave early, and they were all relaxed and happy, looking forward to a long holiday weekend with no deadline looming. Then we got this call. Dot, dot, dot. Basically, the talk 2 has the same message and meaning as talk 1, but talk 2 has these four elements. Last summer is a time. Then there is Robert, the protagonist. Then there are lots of details, which is hard work, overtime, happy, long holiday weekend, suspense, and all that stuff. And this is where you have to be a little bit creative, be willing to use these words that come from the parts of the brain which is into linguistics and much more creative elements, and make your presentations a lot more interesting. The point is, and this is something that probably many of you would know because I also worked in the corporate world for about 11 years. This entire form of narratives is missing from our day-to-day lives. We come home and we do a lot of storytelling, but in the offices, I don't know why we don't do it. So here are three or four suggestions, and there could be more, but these are more anecdotal evidence than scientific fact. I think the first is we have inhibitions of fear, that we stereotype our own managers and leaders, and we believe that they're very analytical and they like numbers and they want to appreciate my stories. And again, I said this is anecdotal because I asked my students that why don't you do stories? And most of them respond that, sir, I'm not so sure if my boss will appreciate a story. The second is laziness. I think storytelling requires a lot of research. I think one has to write and practice the story, and that takes a lot of time. And many of us, because we have a very busy life and we have jobs to do and chores to run and families to manage, we do look out for shortcuts, and these shortcuts may not be in our best interest, but the impact of all this is that our presentations do get very boring. And the last is the status quo or the social conformity system or the syndrome, that when a new person joins an office and he sees everybody doing analytical presentations with a lot of numbers and graphs and very boring, he thinks that maybe that's the way this office is and I should follow the suit, and we just adopt the status quo and the social conformity syndrome. In fact, social conformity is a very well researched bias in all of us that was proven by scientists, and they did amazing experiments in a clinical lab. So they got a lot of people sitting in a doctor's office and they were all actors. And whenever a bell would ring, everybody would get up. So a new person who did not know all this, who came to the doctor's office, started seeing that everybody gets up when the bell rings. And very soon she also started getting up. And that's called social conformity, that you do what others are doing because it's very easy to follow people. So what's the secret sauce of storytelling? There is a process, and I call it Oscar, and pun intended here. But it's always easier to use these acronyms because it is easier to remember. There are 5 steps. The first is every story has to have an objective in a business setting. After all, you have business audiences listening to you, you have your managers and customers, and communication always has an objective. So please make sure you have a smart objective for your stories. Second is look at the setting. And this is where you can add the protagonist, the name, the place, the details, all that jazz to make the setting a lot more interesting, a lot more likable, and a lot more fun for the people. The third step is that there must be a challenge somewhere or some kind of a complication. And the fourth step is you must find the resolution of that challenge. That how did you solve that problem? What steps did you do to solve it? And finally, there is this climax or ending which everybody would appreciate, that everything falls in place, and that ending leads to the objective and a key message that everybody would enjoy. So Oscar is O for objective, S for setting, C for challenge, R for resolution, and E for ending. And it all kind of goes in a circular way to connect with each other. And please understand that while stories are very gentle, they also can be very confusing. So if you don't do these steps right, you might leave your audiences very confused and they might not like your presentation. So this takes tremendous amount of effort and time. Now let's see if this scenario works in day-to-day lives. And I've been teaching communication full time for the last 7 years, and before that I used to be doing it in my spare time, and I've tried to use it in at least my life. So I'll give you some scenarios which I've heard and are true, that you might be willing to learn from. So here is the first scenario of a great story I heard. This gentleman is Mr. Harkesh Mittal. He works with the Department of Science and IT Incubation in Government of India, and he's very popular, and he promotes entrepreneurship throughout the country. So I was sitting in his session one day and he narrated this story. So I thought I'll take that story and share it with you. So there was this young entrepreneur who used to make artificial flowers. That was his business idea. He had put in his own money. He had applied for some funds, and that investors were somewhere in US. So he was called to meet them. So he was a entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur's life is very busy. So he did not prepare for this presentation. And on the last day, he had to catch his flight. And he said that, okay, let me carry a bouquet of flowers, which are my prototype, all the way from Hyderabad to California. That's where the investors were. I think it was not investors, it was a Berkeley Incubation Award or something like that. But for this story, let's use the word investors. So he puts this bouquet of flowers, wraps it in a newspaper, and dumps it in his cabin baggage. The flight takes off from Hyderabad, and after 16, 17, 20 hours, he lands up in California, and he carries his bundle of flowers and comes for immigration. And there he is stopped by the immigration officer. The officer says that, sir, you cannot bring biological things in our country. And this is a flower, you should not have brought it, so I'll have to take you inside the room and do some interrogation. This entrepreneur said that, sir, these are plastic flowers. Please look at them. The immigration officer said, sir, nothing doing. Please step into that room and we'll do an interrogation. So he was taken into a room where he was made to sit for about 1 or 2 hours. People came to ask him questions. Then the immigration officer actually called an expert who came to judge the flowers. And he actually declared that, yeah, these are plastic flowers. They are really not biological specimens. And before he left, they said that we really need to take a photograph of you and the flowers, because these flowers look so nice. They look almost real. So he said, all right. He had all the time. The pitch was tomorrow morning. So he said, fine, I'll oblige you. So they all got together at the airport. He was standing in the middle with his flowers, and these police officers and this immigration officers and that expert and all around him, and they took a picture. So this entrepreneur said that, if you don't mind, can I get a copy of this picture? So they gave him the copy of the picture. Now he takes a taxi from the airport, comes to his hotel, and before he goes in his room, he has some time. So he goes to some nearby flower shops to just see what are the kind of flowers California uses. And he carries his bunch of flowers with him. So at that flower shop, the person who ran that flower shop got so attracted to these flowers that he said, where did you get these flowers from? And the entrepreneur said that, hey, I make these flowers in India. So this florist was so impressed by this quality of flowers that he placed an order of $10,000, gave a check to him, and he cut a deal. And the entrepreneur came back to his room and made his slides and slept. And the next day, when his pitch was there, he opened up his slide deck. There were only two slides there. The first slide had the picture of him with the immigration officers, and he narrated the story of how he was stopped because the flowers looked so real. And the second slide was a photo of the check of $10,000, where he said that, I met a florist and he's given me $10,000 advance. And I think you can all guess what happened after this pitch. He got the funding. And the power of these two stories are so clearly evident that there are two options in front of us. One, we use our standard decks and presentation of entrepreneurial pitching. But two, you make your entrepreneurial pitching a lot more interesting. And the more stories you use, the more people will agree with you. So this type of story is called stories from personal experiences, which means your experiences must be so unique and so rich that you're able to convert them into a narrative and explain it to people with an objective and they agree with you. So this is scenario one. Let's look at scenario two, which is on the next slide. This is one of my favorite speeches by one of my favorite author called Malcolm Gladwell. And if you have not read his books or if you have not heard him speak, you must do that. He not only speaks very well, but he also researches concepts very well. And one of his speeches in the University of Toronto, I have put a link here, and these slides will be given to you. And in this story, he talks for about 8 minutes, and out of the 8 minutes, he spends 6 minutes on a story from World War II, where there was a device that could help the American planes drop bombs with accuracy. Because in World War II, the biggest problem was the bombs that were being hurled from the airplanes were missing the targets by miles. So it was a waste of time and effort. So this engineer actually made a device that could help the pilots drop bombs with amazing accuracy. And this project was a big success. They funded $500 million, or I think $1.5 billion. But in reality, that entire device and its impact was absolutely useless. So in these 6 minutes of story, Malcolm Gladwell connects this story to all the students who are graduating from the University of Toronto. And he tells them that your degree is exactly what you need to be worried about, that you spent a lot of time and money, but they will not help you in the real world. And he tells all the students that the real world problems are solved by strength, ethics, perseverance, and many more things that are not taught in schools. And the point of this story that I'm trying to make is that Malcolm Gladwell would have spent months to research this story. He would have gone and sat down in public libraries, read books about this particular device. There must be archives of the defense that must be available to him. And he's a journalist, so journalists have a lot of information. And he combined that months of effort into a 6 minute story. So imagine the amount of effort he would have put in just to tell that story, concise it, and connect it with the audience with a specific objective. So research plays a crucial element in storytelling. You must all be now looking at a slide, and slides can be stories too. This is one of my favorite slides that I saw in WhatsApp floating around recently. I'm pretty sure many of you would have seen this slide. Look at this slide. The title stays The Relationship Between Your Degree and Your Field of Work. A person walking in the desert, dressed up in a swimming costume, and not just dressed, I think overdressed with an oxygen tank. And when you look at this picture, it hits you that this itself is a story. There's a protagonist, there is a place, there is no time, but sometimes stories can be timeless. And there is a setting, which is these mountains and this sand. And it has a message. The message is the title of this picture, which is the relationship between your degree and your field of work. And slides can be amazing stories. So instead of making your slides too busy with a lot of boring numbers, see if you can make them interesting with some slides like these. And these slides are difficult to make. It requires a lot of creativity and effort, which you need to start putting in. So what should you learn from this whole scenario and the whole lecture that we have been discussing? That please start collecting stories and narratives that you can share with others in your business talks. It takes a lot of effort, but I think the amount of ROI or returns you will get is very, very important. I think you might experience a technical glitch. My Microsoft Office just crashed, but it is restarting. But don't worry, I'll fill you in with what happened. It's just come back again. Vibhor, can you see my slide decks?
Yes, I can see yours. You can
Okay,
please
and we are
continue.
on the same slide which I was talking about.
Yeah, everybody can see it. We are getting messages. Yes, they can see your slides.
Excellent. Okay, so what should you learn from this? Start collecting stories, as I talked about. The second is it takes a tremendous amount of research and effort to get your stories. It's almost like spending time in a lab and tinkering with your product and making it work and writing your script and trashing that script if the story is not coming right. My dear friends, if you want to make a great product, it requires time in labs. And if you're not spending times in labs, I think your products will not be good. And the same philosophy applies in speeches, public speaking, oratory, TED Talks, and storytelling. And you all will make presentations and you have a chance to impress people and become a leader, but you have to spend time in labs and go and write those stories which will come out very well. And finally, I'll end here that if you look at this picture on the slide, it is not just idlis and sambar and the chutney, it's also the presentation, the content, and the style. So you just can't throw idli sambar in a plate. You have to plate it. You have to think it right. And you have to design it so that it visually is very beautiful. So please give both style and content. Some minor other suggestions are avoid cliches, stories that are very common. Like, for example, the spider and the king brew story. I think it's done to death. Try and go deeper into stories and find some stories that are better. And last is that please do not assume that your personal story is going to work well. Sometimes, our stories are like our children. We always find them flawless, but the world doesn't think like that. So you have to take your stories with a pinch of salt. And I have given lots of examples for you on YouTube. There are also some articles that I have curated for you. And the idea is not to worry about the content, but how the story has been used. And there are some other stories that can be used for your work. And here are my contact details that I will not bore you with. But what I want to do now is spend time on your questions. So my request